This is the Jedburgh podcast. I'm the host, Fran Rachopi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning, no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh podcast is founded in the lineage of the Special Operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is sponsored by Talent War Group, an executive search and talent advisory. Visit talentwargroup.com for more. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. This episode is brought to you by Analytics. As owners of small to medium-sized businesses, we face tons of challenges in our companies. Imagine if our only role as owners was to focus on growing our business, not on all the other stuff that needs to get done. Analytics specializes in helping businesses succeed by doing just that, managing everything else. Analytics provides a deep bench of solutions to handle the most complex challenges in finance and accounting, IT, data management, AV, and healthcare. Around these services, they wrap Insight 360, a cloud-based portal that houses your company's financial and operational information. Insight 360 develops customized reports showing key metrics, benchmarks, and KPIs for better insight into your business's performance. Visit analytics.com for more information. That's ANALYTIX.com. September 11th, 2001 changed the world forever. The United States of America was attacked by Osama Bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda Terrorist Network. They were provided safe haven and protection by the Taliban, a brutal extremist organization who occupied and ruled Afghanistan through a strict interpretation of Sharia law. Within weeks of the attack, United States Special Forces, the Green Berets, launched an offensive into Afghanistan backed by the power of the U.S. Air Force. The Taliban was defeated in weeks. Since then, the United States and the international community have built and supported the Afghan government and the Afghan military as part of the global war on terror. Now, 20 years later, the United States has left Afghanistan. The Taliban is back in control of the country. Thousands of Afghans are displaced and back under threat by an oppressive regime. An unknown number of American citizens remain stranded, and the world is left wondering both, how did we get here, and where do we go from here? In this episode, I'm joined by former Secretary of Defense Chris Miller, No One Left Behind board members Mariah Smith and J.D. Dolan, and Sonia Nowruz, an Afghan immigrant whose family remains stranded in Kabul. Secretary Miller was one of the first Green Berets into Afghanistan in 2001. He has since led at all levels of military command, as well as leading the National Counterterrorism Center and serving as the Assistant Secretary of Defense to Special Operations Low-Intensity Conflict. Mariah, J.D., and Sonia lead No One Left Behind in its mission to support the relocation, resettlement, and humanitarian efforts to aid displaced Afghan refugees. Mariah and J.D. each served in Afghanistan 3 times. Sonia is an ambassador to incoming Afghan immigrants to the United States. Each of my guests share their 9/11 stories, the impact the attack had on them, and how they've answered the nation's call. We break down the rise of the Taliban, how our presence for 20 years still resulted in a chaotic withdrawal, the situation in Afghanistan now, the next steps politically, diplomatically, and militarily, and how we all can get involved. Mr. Secretary, Sonia, Mariah, J.D., welcome to the Jedburgh podcast.
Are we supposed to say we're honored to be here now? I'm sorry, Fran. This is awesome, man. Thanks for having us. This is like so important, man.
Everybody's nervous, so you break the ice.
I know it's not like Barstool Sports, but I think, thanks for doing this. And this is really like important stuff, man. So thanks for continuing to give back to the community, man.
Well, I thank you for being here.
I didn't have a choice. I was told I had to be here.
We made you. You have to show up.
Called in a lot of favors. Thanks for being here.
Public. So this is a really important episode here today because this is our 9/11 episode. And it's been 20 years since our nation was attacked by Al-Qaeda and Osama Bin Laden. It was the blue sky day, September 11th, 2001. 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 California-bound airplanes. American Airlines Flight 11 was flown into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46. United 175 flown into the South Tower, 9:03. 9:37, United 77 flown into the west side of the Pentagon. And at 10:03, United 93, believed to be bound for the White House or the Capitol, crashed in the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. 2,996 people were killed that morning. But before the dust settled, the fire stopped burning. And long before the rescue and recovery operations were complete, our nation was at war. Sir, you were at war. The world was changed forever. But each one of us in this room, our lives were changed. And the path that we chose for ourselves from that moment was defined. Okay. And that's why I think this is so important, because there are certain events in our lives that set the course for the decisions we make in the future. We all remember exactly where we were at the moment I just described. You remember where you were the 10 minutes prior, and you remember the actions you took right after that. But you don't remember the day before. I can guarantee you that. And that's why these moments are so defined. From that point forward, from the afternoon of September 11th, the United States embarked on what we called the global war on terror, the relentless pursuit of our enemies, both foreign and domestic, to ensure that we never ever woke up to another 9/11. 20 years later, we sit here. 7,000 service members and DoD civilians have been killed. That doesn't even include the CIA, the FBI, Department of State, other government organizations, civilian casualties, coalition nation deaths are not even included in that number. But the last few days, last few weeks, we've left Afghanistan. We've been there since October 7th of 2001. But now the final U.S. personnel officially are gone. Chaos has ensued. More lives were lost. The Taliban, who we overthrew in October of 2001, is back in charge. 20 years have gone by, and we're forced to ask ourselves the question of, where did we go? What have we done? Where are we today? There's 122,000 Afghan refugees that have been airlifted outside of Afghanistan. There are unknown numbers of Americans still in Afghanistan today, and there are thousands more Afghan refugees who need to get out of there because they're being persecuted and hunted by the Taliban as we speak. And now where do we go? As a nation, as an international community, we've got to figure that out. So I say all this because it's an important discussion. And this group here, I think, is very well positioned to have that discussion. So again, I thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to getting into this and telling the story from each of your perspectives. In a lot of ways, this story about Afghanistan starts with the Taliban. Now I think it ends with the Taliban, possibly. They're an occupying power. They've been there 1996 through 2001 when we displaced them. Sir, you commanded a special forces company in 5th Special Forces Group that overthrew them, one of the first people in. J.D. Mariah, you both served in Afghanistan 3 times, completed multiple tours there against Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS. But Sonia, well, I want to start with you because you grew up there. You're in a family where you had sisters, no brothers. The Taliban came in, they took power. Your father was an engineer, your mother was a school teacher. And so I'm wondering from your perspective, if you could talk about that, and you can talk about the Taliban coming into Afghanistan, taking power from the government, and what was it like to have to grow up in that environment?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having us all here together and having this great and important discussion. It was scary. Even if I remember it now, even when I think of it now, I get scared. It's very fearful. So when the Taliban got first control of the country, we were in Kabul, Afghanistan. I was around 13 years old. So I remember it from the sad face of my father that everything is going to be really, really bad, especially for a family that they don't have male supporters. Like we were only 3 girls, and with the current situation, what were happening, it was scary. So to start with my own story, like as a small family, it was very challenging and difficult for us in a sense because my mom was a teacher and my dad was a supporter of education. So for him, it was very hard to not have her kids go to school and to not have her children like well educated and continue to their education. So it was so sad for him. It was the time when he decided, no, I have to have my kids learn and be educated. So that's how we find out some private courses that they were teaching English. So we got a hand in there and we have been going in privately to those courses to learn English. Obviously, we were learning our own language and other general knowledge from my father. But when it comes to the like attending courses, we were going to the private courses that were organized, obviously only for females and like in private. So we end up going, 3 sisters, we end up going to all those courses and we could luckily manage to finish completing all English courses. It was not accompanied to that private group of teachers that we had. And then luckily with the support of our family, we could manage to become an English teacher and to teach English only for women and girls, but obviously privately and very, very fearful.
And what would have happened if the Taliban knew that this was going on?
They would put you to jail. There were circumstances, there were times that they would get into the course. Obviously, we would say we're here for learning like general courses, like tailoring, like learning Holy Quran. We had those courses too, to be honest. But beside that, we had English classes as well. So if they caught us, they would put us to jail. There was a circumstance that they caught one of the classes and they went right inside the class that they were teaching. My sister was in that class, exactly on the same class the Taliban get into that class. And they had to, they didn't have burqas. Obviously, in the class, they didn't wear burqas. All were females. And they had to, go under one burqa, 2% or 3% to hide themselves. It was scary, but their teacher stood up for them, and they didn't let them to get the girls out of the classrooms. But then the course has been stopped. It was very challenging. It was very, very scary. When I talk about it, I still get anxiety. It still disturbs me.
Sonia, on September 11th, 2001, where were you?
I was in Kabul.
And the events that unfolded in the U.S., was it known in Afghanistan what was going on?
As far as I remember, the first thing we heard early in the morning that they have executed the former president, Mr. Najibullah. And his body was strung up from a concrete traffic control post, which was very close to our house where we were living. It was scary, and people were so fearful of what was happening. And I could only still remember the sad face of my father and how fearful he was. And I still remember he telling us, we will not have a bright future, which we did not for a couple of years.
Sir, September 11th, 2001.
Man, I wish you would stop calling me sir. My name is Chris.
I can't.
I'm Chris
You're the
Miller,
Secretary
man.
of Defense.
Hey, Sonia. Sonia, Chris Miller here. I'm really saddened and I'm sorry that we've let you down and we've let your family down. And it's just a horrifying story. And thanks for sticking with it. And, inshallah, we'll get some stuff going and hopefully take care of some folks that need it. And I'm just, as an American, I just want to say I'm sorry that your family's in this situation.
Thank you. But my heart and my mind is after all women, girls who are trapped there, honestly, and all the families, honestly. I have been through that situation and I know how hard it is because I stepped on all those situations. And the history is repeating itself, no matter what the Taliban will say. But they will not do what they'll say, honestly. They'll not stand on their commitments. There will be examples of what they will do, honestly. But my fear is what will happen to all those women and girls who were trapped there? What will happen to the families who were really work with the United States government? Who left behind. I know everybody is doing a great job. I'm very thankful. Everybody is doing a great job, but still, there are so many people who are really looking for help.
Fran, I know I'm bootlegging your podcast and you can kick me off and cut my mic. You guys are veterans. Sonia has experienced real challenges, but you're all leaders. And I remember being told by this old Vietnam vet one time about the role of leadership at times like this is to keep hope alive. And you're like, they never trained me, or I never heard that when I was in officer training or in basic training, but that's really where we are right now. And keep hope alive. And it's hard, man, isn't it? It's been a tough 17 days. I think this thing started coming undone that Sunday. I think we all knew the thing was undone. I started getting the feeling on Friday. But I'm jumping ahead.
That's all right. How did we get there? I mean, in your opinion, how did we get to where we are now, but 17 days ago? Why? It's been 20 years. We've been there. We understand fundamentally so much about what's going on in the country.
Were any of you all surprised the armed forces fell so fast? I wasn't. As soon as we pulled off, hey, remember we were trained how you're going to fight? Remember how we were always told that? And we trained the Afghan army to have air support, fires, artillery, mortars, medical evacuation, and logistics support. That's the way we trained them. And then we pulled all that. Of course, the army, we trained them to fight a different way. So it was completely predictable to me. Was it to you guys, or am I just like hallucinating?
No, I think that you have to have the logistics in place. If you have the logistics in place, then you can fight a war. If you don't, you can't.
I don't know, man. I'm a little disturbed by this whole, you guys.
I think we hoped that we would have more time. We were just delaying the inevitable, but we had begun flying translators out on commercial tickets just in the days before Kabul fell to try and get more people here. We had a grant to $500,000 to fly as many families as we could. And we were optimistic that we might have 90 days before Kabul fell. So I believe we all knew it was coming. I personally thought we would have more than just the 3 or 4 days that we had.
Yeah, I think the whole concept of a planned withdrawal, from early days in training, even just learning the basics, it's certainly reaffirmed that a planned withdrawal is the most critical part and certainly one of the most dangerous parts of an operation. So this idea that we could draw a line in the sand, fairly arbitrary date, and somehow miraculously achieve all the things necessary in a extremely complex operation under a withdrawal. So I would agree with you. I think, unfortunately,
I'm just the heretic, man. We took the country down with 200 special operators and paramilitary officers. I really felt that, and that's what we have them for, that's what they do. It's not like they're trained, equipped, paid to do low signature, small footprint, low visibility support. That's what we pay them for. That's what we pay all this money for. I think we could have put the enablers. Remember in 73 for the, in Vietnam, Easter offensive, where we had...
You're the only one who...
Dude, I was worried that...
The rest of us weren't around.
Yeah, man. So, seriously, I was 8 years old, but they only had 3 TV channels then. And you'd come home and not want to do homework. So, hey, Mom, I'll watch the news. Sure, watch the news. So I was a weirdo that way. But in 73, when the North Vietnamese made their quote-unquote final offensive, we blew them back with small advisory teams kind of at the brigade level, meaning like, what's brigade? 3,500, 4,000 people, and provided them air support, logistics support, medical evacuation support. I don't know how many Americans we lost during that. I'm going to look that up on my handheld computer here eventually, which I can't have in here because we're afraid it'll have too much backlog.
Your phone will go off.
Yeah. So I thought we had a model that we could use. I totally agree. The Taliban had won, but I thought we could have brought this thing in for a controlled crash where everybody would have survived. I didn't think we were going to have just this cataclysmic, fiery crash on the ground. I don't think we needed to do it this way. I thought we had people that could have done some stuff to stiffen the spine of and I'm a huge fan of the Afghan army. Come on, we've been with them. We fought with them. They can get the job done.
There's thousands trained.
Yeah.
There.
Sorry, I took you off.
No, that's okay.
Talking point. I remember where I was September 10th of 2001 because I had decided I was working for a guy from the 10th Special Forces Group.
Yeah.
It's Fran's old outfit. And I was in the 5th Special Forces Group at the time.
So you're seeking guidance from...
And let me tell you how it was, because it was zero defect army. There was no money to train. And it was a really, really old school culture that no one wanted. I didn't want to be part of it anymore because it was just so negative and enervating. And I went home that night and I told my wife that we were leaving the service. On September 10th, dude. You shouldn't say dude. I'm sorry. That shows my age. I literally, no kidding, went home and sat down with my wife. We had, at the time, 3 small children. And we would always have a cocktail when I got home just to catch up for the day, and made a decision. I'm not making this up. I said, these are small times for small people. And I'd made the decision to leave the service. I'd been in for 14 years as an officer, went to physical training the next day. And we went to Clarksville Base, which is this, training area. Each Army installation has one. And I went for a run with the company sergeant major I worked with, this amazing guy named Mel Bynum, who ended up going to 10th Special Forces Group to have a battalion as a command sergeant major, the senior non-commissioned officer in a battalion. And we went for a run on the 11th, and we're like, I was going to go put my resignation paperwork in when I got back. And I got in the car, and I'm driving back to work because it was about a mile and a half. And there was this radio show called the John Boy and Billy Show. At the time, it was new, and it was kind of like this redneck sort of Howard Stern.
I think I remember that.
Yeah. They're still on, but they just don't get it done anymore. But they were really cutting edge then. And I'm laughing, and all of a sudden, the feed stopped, and their news person came on and said, we have a report of a plane hitting one of the Twin Towers. And they had a kind of comedic air, and that wasn't comedic. And I was like, holy cow. So you said it must have been 7:46 in the morning. Our time, it was 8:46. We were Central Standard, drove back to work, walked in the Intel shop, the S2 shop, and they had the TVs on. I think the Intel shop was the only ones that were allowed to have TVs then, and they to pay because, there's no money. Well, we ought to follow open source reporting or, which they
ESPN.
Right, ESPN and Oprah and stuff. And went in there, then the second plane went in. And I thought it was a replay. I was like, is that a replay? And they're like, no, that's live. And I was like, we are going to war. And we all knew, let me tell you, man, we all knew it was Al-Qaeda. Hire said, oh, just take it easy. We need to let the intel build. Everybody knew it was Al-Qaeda. And we were 5th Special Forces Group, which our area of responsibility was the Middle East. And it was like game on. And so the fellas, I had to go to this meeting with the battalion commander, the 10th group guy, and all the leadership. And we sat down and they were like, hey, there's nothing to see here. Just take it easy. We need you to be calm. And we're like, calm? We're fixed. It's going to be payback time. Walked back. We had these crappy old barracks. It was like the plumbing didn't work. And
the World War II.
Yeah, it was great, man. And we were an Alpha company in the basement, in the bottom floor. So Bravo and Charlie, all of their latrines leaked. So it all came down into here through my office. My office, urine would be coming through on my desk. It was just disgusting. And I went back. We had this long hall, and all the fellas are out doing their checks in their equipment. And they're like, what's going on, sir? I'm like, going to war. Keep going. And off we went.
How long after?
So we only knew how to do Cold War stuff. So everybody goes over. The nicest building we had at Fort Campbell was the isolation facility.
Because it never got used.
That's why. The rebellion was funny because they isolated. Oh, you're just going to isolate for 96 hours. A week later, people are like, this is crap. And there was a rebellion at the gate because all the Green Berets, we're going home. Yeah. And I was not part of the first. I think we put 6-8 teams into isolation. We launched the first group, I think went out first week of October.
So you got out there, and there's an important point here that I think we want to make. And the motto of the Green Beret and Army Special Forces is Deo Presso Liber, free the oppressed.
I can never pronounce it right.
Well, I studied Latin, so.
Good, I'm glad some of it.
There you go. We'll replay that for you. But that is a really important term in terms of Afghanistan and the Taliban then and today, because this is an oppressive regime. This is a regime that by definition oppresses its people. And so from an actual mission of the Green Beret, this was textbook.
This is what we created Special Forces for. The Special Forces Regiment was to go behind enemy lines, link up with insurgent surrogate forces, and overthrow tyrannical regimes. And we got to do it. And I got to be part of it. I think 200 people get credit for the initial invasion. It was like, at D-Day, you get assault landing credit if you made it by 23:59:59 on the 6th of June, 1944. I literally was the last dude that got assault landing credit. I didn't get assault landing credit, but got credit for being one of the 200. So my role was this big. But we linked up with Karzai, who was running the South, and went down there and we took down the government. I'd like to say captured Kandahar, the spiritual capital of the Taliban. We rolled in there. They'd already took off. We went in without a fight. I have a great photo where we're in Hilux pickup trucks, like Toyota.
I've been trying to get one ever since.
Toyota Tacoma kind of, right?
On steroids.
Yeah. Ours had been blown up, and the fellas, there were 3 of them that got destroyed on the 5th of December. We had this horrible event, a friendly fire incident. You can't say that because the Air Force won't admit to it, but 2,000-pound drop was 2,000-pound joint direct attack munition, JDAM, was dropped on our own position, and it killed 3 guys that were in the company I commanded. J.D. Davis was the team sergeant. Dan Pettitori was the commo guy. And then we had a signal intelligence guy there. Cody Prosser was attached to him. And then I think like 12 Afghans were killed, whole tons of people injured, all that stuff. So we went in there, and all the pickup trucks that we had just been delivered, right? Like the night before, they delivered these beautiful Hilux pickup trucks. No, they were Tacomas. Because we cleared out the park. If every car sales dealership in Clarksville, Tennessee, bought all the Tacomas. They finally got them there. They had 3 of these beautiful brand new Tacomas that were just absolutely just devastated when the bomb hit. But then we had these dudes that were good wrenchers, only in special forces, right? Like, oh yeah, I used to be a mechanic. They put one of the trucks back together. So then we took Kandahar. So the point I was trying to make is we take Kandahar, and I remember there is a Hilux next to me. I'm like, that lady looks familiar. They're like, it's Christian Amanpour. She beat us to Kandahar, man.
Really?
Yeah.
So Sonia, you talked about your dad and your dad's feelings about the future and the next couple of months after the Taliban took over on September 10th, September 11th. And now, a couple weeks later, you have American special forces on the ground in Afghanistan. There's U.S. Air Force jets all over the place, dropping bombs, fighting the Taliban. From your perspective there, what was that like?
We were like hoping for a bright future. We were under impression that there will be a good change. My father was the one who were telling us that we will have a good future. We're hoping that after all this happens, and after the attack on US on 9/11, and after all these bombs and like missions that's going on, Taliban regime will be collapsed. And we will be having a future. So we were really looking for a bright future. We had a good impressions of the situation.
Well, I'll tell you, those first few weeks, months, watching what you were doing there on the ground. Now, I was a junior in college at that point, studying broadcast journalism. I wanted to be Tom Brokaw. And now I say that and people are like, who's Tom Brokaw? And I'm like, oh man, I'm getting old. Yeah, I think everyone here still knows who that is. But that period of time for journalism, it changed journalism because of embedded journalism. And where we actually started putting reporters out into the field with military units. And what I saw during that time was folks like you going out there and what became the horse soldiers. And I say, they grew long hair, they had beards, they rode horses, and they were changing the world. And my perspective said, why would I go report on this when one day I can go be one of these guys? And so I said, well, forget it. I'm going to ride out the next couple of years. I'll finish this journalism degree. And then when I'm done, I'm going to do that. So that moment in time, watching you change my perspective, because that's what I wanted to be.
Man, I wanted to be you, dude. I always wanted to be a photojournalist, not a broadcast journalist. But hey, Joe Rogan, the kids will know what Joe Rogan is.
He's very famous.
Yeah.
I've tagged him in some
Tom
posts.
Brokaw, not so much anymore.
I think they're way different. Mariah, you spent 3 tours in Afghanistan over the course of 14 or 15 years. Sonia talked about the hope, talked about the change, and their perspective of being an Afghan and looking at the Americans coming into the country and seeing this bright future. Through your 14 years, you saw an evolution, having been there now 3 times. Can you talk about the difference that you saw every time you went back and the growth of the country?
Sure. My first tour was there in 2007. I was a company commander in 4th Brigade of the 82nd in Khost Province. I'm a military police officer. Really, at the time, one of the only options for MPs in the brigades was to command the HHC. So I commanded the HHC for 4th Brigade. And at the time, that was one of those 15-month tours, and we relieved 10th Mountain Division. And it was the forgotten war. Iraq was the focus. We went up from 1 brigade to 2 brigades, and that was the only amount of forces really in the country at the time, conventional forces. That was a very rough tour. That was a very long tour. We had a lot of folks wounded. We lost a lot of our soldiers. Efforts to train with, the Afghan National Army were still felt like they were in their early stages. We would go and train with the 203rd down in Gardez, Camp Thunder and Lightning. And it was still a lot of just direct action, trying to fight, being attacked, IEDs. And the police force and the Afghan army didn't feel as developed as when I went back for my second tour in 2010. And that was the most hopeful tour that I recall. I was a major by that point. I went to work for NATO training mission Afghanistan under the command of General Caldwell. At the time, I had just come from a 1-year fellowship with Congress, which is how I got into that position with NTMA as their legislative liaison working under ISAF. And I got to see at the top level at that point how all the coalition of NATO nations had come together to really develop the Afghan army and police into a sustaining force and providing all those things that you described at the beginning of the podcast, the air power, artillery, maintenance support, medical support, all those systems that had to be developed and supported in order to create an enduring force. That was a 12-month tour. There was a lot of money and energy and hope at the time that the Afghan army was going to be able to be built into this enduring force that could secure their country once we ultimately left. And then in 2014, I went back for my final tour. I was a senior major. I was a battalion XO for a criminal investigation division. And that was more focused on, it was the Obama administration. We were seeing the drawdown. We were going from the 9,000 plus troops in theater down to just under 5,000. So we participated in that drawdown. And there was a lot less hope at the time. Equipment was being collapsed and pulled back to Kuwait and other places. Bases were being shut down and turned over. We were hoping that the systems that we had put in place for the Afghan army and police were going to endure, but we were already withdrawing some of our support. And the most striking difference I remember, on the 2010 tour with NATO training mission, we were buying planes for the Afghan Air Force, we were training pilots, we were putting all these systems in place. And then on the 2014 tour, we actually had to pay to destroy and cut up some of those planes that we had helped the Afghan Air Force purchase because they just weren't able to be sustained. The maintenance trail wasn't there. So then when I retired in 2020, I wanted to stay involved. And that's why I ultimately joined the board for No One Left Behind.
Chris, I have a question about one of the points that Mariah made, because you've been very, I won't say critical, but I'd say you've been vocal about not bringing a large amount of conventional forces into Afghanistan.
Ooh.
And that it's a special forces mission.
I get talking tos regularly by the people that know better because they're higher ranking or have better degrees than I have. Yeah, I get a lot of pushback on that, not from the regiment, because we all know there's this dude, we were in Kandahar and 101st just landed. I can't remember when it was. And standing there with this grizzled team sergeant named Steve Long, and we're at Kandahar Airfield. He goes, "Sir, it's time for us to go home." And we're looking at this tent being built. And I'm like, "Why is that, Steve?" He goes, "That's the PX tent. Anytime the PX shows up, it's time for the Green Berets to leave." And I laughed. And I was like, "Steve doesn't understand the big picture,
We need our coffee."
I literally always look back and go, he was right. I still felt that if we would have just kept that as a special operations theater and kept it like small footprint, because then you wouldn't have created that dependency. And come on, you guys, we did it again. We built an army in our image in a country that didn't have this. You go there.
Exactly.
Go there.
No, you're on it. Couldn't agree more.
We did it again. And so why is that? We got to do some critical analysis on the way we're doing our things in our national security and our strategy, because when we came up with that one, I have my opinion. We called it the last cavalry charge, where the conventional forces had to get into it. It all came down to the bureaucratic, and you've done leg affairs. You know how it is. Like, oh my gosh, we can't let those crazy special operators get all the credit. You know, we got to justify the 82nd Airborne Division. I love your division, by the way. No, seriously. Yeah, it's really great. What's 4th Brigade's like? What are they called? Like the White Tigers or some crap? What are they?
Fury from the Sky, they also don't exist anymore. They were stood up and then stood back down in the brigade combat team, reshuffling.
I'm sorry.
Fury from the Sky.
You guys like that? I like that. Fury from the Sky. Devils in baggy pants.
We've got to go to the Ranger Battalion guy in the room, though, for a minute. We talk about Fury from the Sky. That's my Ranger buddy over here. All right, JD, I'll caveat this in that we spoke with General Clay Hutmacher. I think it was like episode 17. And Clay Hutmacher commanded the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. And my point to General Hutmacher was that there is no greater projection of combat power than the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. However, and he'll get mad at me for this, he's still a taxi driver for you, all right? Because they're dropping somebody off in those aircraft, at least the non-attack aircraft. So someone's got to get off those, and 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment's one of those units. You spent 3 deployments into Afghanistan, and we're involved in the most confrontational battles with the enemy there. So can you talk about your 3 tours there, the evolution you saw, and also your 9/11 story?
Sure. Yeah, no, it'd be an honor. And I'll try and keep the 9/11 story short because I have a tendency to talk a lot about it. But I think like most of us, I remember not just hours, but minutes. I remember the classroom I was in, the phone call I received from my dad, this corner cafeteria office we all huddled in to watch the news. But I think the feeling it's still intense today. I remember it like it was yesterday, was a feeling of being helpless. Like for the first time in my life, and I was fortunate, I was raised in a patriotic household, loved the country. My dad was a airborne ranger qualified infantry officer in Vietnam. And I grew up believing so deeply in what our country did and could do. But that feeling, watching that screen, like most of us, I felt this horrific sense of there's nothing I can do. Like I'm standing here and watching this and nothing I could do. And the next thought I had is never again. Like there's never again going to be a time in my life when I could have done something and I didn't. So for me, it was I would call it a fairly deliberate path. I ended up grabbed a bunch of guys in a small private school outside of DC and had a couple of particularly supportive teachers, one of which, Mr. Tonelli, is, still a legend in my eyes, but he gave us the freedom to take some time off. So obviously most kids weren't in school for the next few days, but we decided that we were going to go down to DC. And I, gave all my friends my dad's old, fatigues from Vietnam. We wore black shirts and we had signs that basically said, support our nation, honk for the USA, et cetera. We carried American flags. And this was our way of saying like, hey, we're just kids, but we want to make sure those that are making decisions that are much more critical than ours are going to see that there's people out there that are behind them. And subsequently, those same photos we found years later, the first time and only time that TV Guide has had a non-advertisement on the back was a picture of us with an American flag. And, the same thing, there was a textbook, I'm a poli-sci major, and my textbook had a photo of me.
That's why you went in the Army.
Yeah, that's it.
Couldn't do anything else.
That was the beginning of the end, was college. But for us, the path had been defined. I knew I wanted to be in the military since I was born, but it was going to be, I wanted to be in a unit where I could wear an American flag on my shoulder. I didn't want there to be any question what unit I represented, and we were going to find our way there. So 10 years later, almost to the day, I was on a mountain in Afghanistan leading a strike force of Rangers in a significant battle. At the time, it was considered the most significant battle in the war on terror in terms of enemy killed. And for me, that was a defining moment where I knew, I had achieved this lifelong dream of having an impact, being in a position to make a difference in something that I thought was important. And at that point in time, it was a decision about what comes next. And I think we're going to spend some time on that later, because I think the events of the last week have helped define for me what comes next, which, to be honest with you, a month ago, I couldn't have told you. But reflecting back on the privilege of 10, 11, and 12. So Iraq, I was in 2009 with the 10th Mountain Division, and then had an opportunity to make my way over to 1st Ranger Battalion, which is truly the privilege of my life. And I went from being what I would like to think would be a superstar stellar officer to being just one of many, walking among giants, literally looking up everywhere, literally and figuratively. You could turn around and close your eyes and pick 7 folks, and they're probably stronger, faster, more competent than you. And that's something that I'll never forget. And I can certainly say in the operations we conducted, and because they were so condensed, my experience was pretty consistent. 2011 was certainly the most kinetic, not surprisingly, during a time when we were dedicating a tremendous amount of resources, particularly in the special operations community, to operations. And I was fortunate that this was my second time with a platoon. We were a fairly senior strike force, so we had a lot of maybe outsized autonomy with respect to the Ranger Regiment and had a really unique mission set. We went in earlier than the battalion and we stayed later. They had a designation for that. So we were in a position to do some exciting things that I felt like really did have an impact on the course of action in history.
You spoke about where we are now. And so I want to go there now because both you and Mariah over the last 2 weeks have been in contact with a lot of people on the ground there, working to get them out. Can you speak for a few minutes about what that has been like? Because I've watched you as we've worked together in the last couple of weeks, and people say you're tied to your phone, but I mean, you're communicating with people on the ground there now, trying to get out and facilitating that.
I'll start. So because of the nature of No One Left Behind, we're in direct contact with a lot of our translators. We call them special immigrant visa recipients or people that have an application in the pipeline. And a couple weeks ago, we were already flying some home on commercial tickets, knowing that Kabul was going to fall. And I live out in Winchester, Virginia, and I have horses, and I, usually go out on the weekends and ride. So I was out riding with some friends. I started talking to them about it when our ride was finished that Saturday. And then I went home and my parents were visiting, and I started talking to them at dinner about how Kabul was, the fall was imminent. And I felt so helpless. And I started crying just at the thought of what was going to happen to everyone. We were already trying to do something, but now was the time for action and to do as much as we possibly could. So just like hundreds of veterans and everyone who's involved, the first few days started off just you set up your workstation in your living room, and we were all talking on WhatsApp and Signal, and none of us slept for days and days and days because it was just a flood of people, Afghans begging us for help, our military friends reaching out to us, and asking like, my translator's still there, my friend is still there, like, what do I do? What do we do? And just trying to manage and figure out what the response could possibly look like. And most importantly, to find a way to account for and understand who was over there, help them capture their documents, those types of things. And that's where it's been ever since.
Yeah, I'd just add, I think, for me, I feel really like Mariah, and I can certainly say a few more things. She's so humble. But I think there was a small group, I would say about half of our board, that had these deep ties and connections back to both folks on the ground and then certainly a connection to those folks, and trying is an understatement, begging to be evacuated. And we were in a position to really make a difference. And because of the jobs we have, so I'm a partner in a private equity firm, and we called the company LDR, which is the military abbreviation for leader. So to suggest that my partners had a pretty good appreciation for both what we did and what we need to do, again, would be an understatement. So they were very supportive of us getting involved, doing whatever we could do at the time. So that literally meant dropping everything and putting your life on pause personally and professionally and finding a way to help. And I think as I reflected back on what did that actually mean, like what is the organizational structure that somehow magnetizes volunteers from it's really across the United States, let's call it what it is. And many of them are veterans, and many of them are some of the 3 million combat veterans that served in Iraq and Afghanistan that decided we do have a moral obligation in addition to a committed one, and we are going to find a way to assist. And that is with or without, official support. So in reflecting on that, I always look to Reagan, but he said, let us ask ourselves, what kind of people do we think we are? And let us answer, free people, worthy of freedom and determined not to only remain so, but to help others gain their freedom as well. And I think that for me really summarizes, it's one thing for us to continue to be a beacon of hope for the world, but that's pretty empty if we don't have a means to get in there and do it. And whether we're given that opportunity, given that coverage, or we decide to take it, I think they're both a moral obligation.
Hey, Fran, can I hijack?
Of course.
Because I want to ask them a question.
Yeah.
I know that's not my role here. I'm just supposed to be cool.
You were supposed to be a photographer.
Yeah, I know. Hey, so you guys, I used to make fun of the Air Force when they'd talk about the Predator and the Reaper pilots that would go to Creech Air Force Base and commute to war. and how they would go do their 12-hour shift and then go pick their kid up from soccer and the cognitive dissonance. And I always kind of made fun of them, to tell you the truth, but I have a whole new appreciation now for what they went through. Can you guys kind of maybe tease that out a little bit? Because I'm making a statement and a question, I know, and you're not supposed to do that, but like the last 16 days, I felt really comfortable again, right?
You're in it.
Yeah, you're leading your platoon or your company or you're in the Joint Operations Center and you're comfortable. You're like, I know how to do this. I'm solving problems. Now, those folks, those citizens that did not have our training and education and experience, that really is tough for me when they would call in tears, like so-and-so's being beaten up and, we're like, geez, because they don't have our experience. Could you guys tease that out a little bit more about your feelings about like, wow, you basically commuted to war and need to get your 2 hours of sleep. And even then your phone's buzzing.
Yeah. As I've talked to other friends, military friends that have usually ones that are saying, hey, I'm trying to help someone, like, what can I do? And there's just such ongoing conversations. Kind of in my low moments, I would tell them, I said, this is the most traumatic thing I can remember experiencing, even in the military. And I'm not even in the military anymore. And I had that same thought about drone operators. Like, I never got it. But we've been so connected. Like, I've never been so digitally connected that I feel like it's just memories getting straight uploaded, like, into my brain. Like, we're seeing the pictures real time. Like, we're having the desperate conversations. Like, there's just this flood of people needing help. I forget that I'm sitting on my horse farm in America or sitting in a conference room in a hotel. Like, I don't feel there. I don't feel like I'm here. I feel like I'm there. And I think the trauma is weighing on all of us. When I finally came home from the hotel where we had a little coordination cell, it felt like coming home from a deployment. Like, I couldn't process the reality that I was back at my house. Like, I couldn't unplug. Like you said, it's constant. It's nonstop.
Well, Sonia's family is stuck there. And so, Sonia, can you talk about what your family's going through right now with your sister, your mother, the communication you're having with them and their fight to get out?
Yes, definitely. So everybody's life is at risk. I just don't want to focus on my sister, but when talking about them, they're more at risk because of us. Why I say because of us is like my sister, my elder, right after Taliban collapsed, I got to work with United Nations. So I worked with them until I got to the United States in 2014. So I was obviously, I've been identified as someone working with foreigners. And then my elder sister, she was a women activist. She has received direct warning from Taliban in 2010. And that's how she had to leave the country. And then my husband, on the other hand, he worked with NATO, ISAF, and USAID for more than a decade. And then we end up coming to the United States and being a U.S. citizen. And then my sister, who's trapped in Kabul, Afghanistan, she worked with the United States government too. And then she's kind of a target and more at risk from various points of us being a U.S. citizen, my sister being Australian citizen. Like, people notice them. I have neighbors, mostly 5 houses apart from us. They're Taliban. They just told me they're like so scared to death that they knew about everything of us. So they're just trapped there. They have been, after they received all kind of documents and everything. They went to the airport. They couldn't get in. Now they're hiding in a relative house because only they don't want to be identified and someone get into a house, get them or something. So they're trapped there. But my voice is not just for my sister. My request and my voice is for all the people who really stood and worked with United States of America, with the U.S. government. I want them to hear these people that left behind. So they're in a critical situation. They're in a bad situation, can't go outside, can't do anything. So they're in a real bad situation. She's the one who really works. She has all her paperwork. I know everybody is doing their job. I'm so appreciative. Everybody is trying hard. but still they're stuck there.
And you're telling me yesterday your cousin, I believe, was beaten by the Taliban this week.
Yes, he is beaten by the Taliban because he is a taxi driver. So he had 4 women in his car to travel them to somewhere, to some places. And he has been stopped in a checkpoint and have been asked, who are these women? And obviously he said the traveler, passengers. And I was like, where's the mahram? Like the man that has to be with them. He said, there's no mahram or man with him. So he has been beaten to death. And like, they have sent his picture to me, which made me cry and cry. Like, they haven't changed. The end point is Taliban haven't changed, no matter what they say. On the ground, when people experience, they haven't changed. So my request from the government as a U.S. citizen is like, please help people who left behind. I know No One Left Behind is doing a great job. I'm so proud to be part of No One Left Behind. And their work inspired me. That's why I joined them. And they're doing everything they can to help everyone. But I'd like to request help from the U.S. government to please stand with them and don't leave them behind.
Chris, what are our options? Where do we go from here?
I'm just stunned.
It reminds me, JD, of the Ranger Creed. And coming from Ranger Battalion, you can certainly appreciate it. And the 5th stanza of the Ranger Creed reads, "Energetically will I meet the enemies of my country. I shall defeat them on the field of battle, for I am better trained and will fight with all my might. Surrender is not a Ranger word. I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy, and under no circumstances will I ever embarrass my country."
That's like the best. Man, whenever I get weak, I read that thing, man. You know, I got a little weak there, got a little weepy. Sorry, I couldn't get my talking points out. I'm just so stunned that this is going on because we've all been in the military and we all know the capability. And I'm not for a moment, I totally agree with the administration. The military, the people on the ground did a remarkable job. I don't know about you guys, but I just was so empathetic for those Marines and the paratroopers and the soldiers on the ground and the Sophie's Choice decisions that they had to make. I cannot believe that our leadership put them in that position. And you know what? I know I'm preaching to the choir, folks. Can I curse on the show?
Yeah.
Once again, those people on the ground made chicken salad out of chicken shit. Fundamentally, we failed them. Our leadership failed them on the ground. And I just can't get beyond it. And I know the political rhetoric, and we're trying not to be political. And there'll be a time to talk about this later. But actually, the time is now, because I did agree with President Biden and Chairman Milley and General Austin. Like, when did they go on TV? I can't even, I've lost track. I think I don't even know what day it is. When they went on and they said there'll be time for, lessons learned and after action reviews later. Well, the time's now. And we messed this up. And we know how. I think any good special operations non-commissioned officer or non-commissioned paratrooper could have planned a better NEO than this. And I think we all know that, and the American people know that. And something's wrong. And we've got to figure out how to bounce back from this kind of failure. And we can blame the State Department all day long. Let's not do that. This is about the United States government. There are things called inherently governmental responsibilities, right? There are things that only the government is supposed to do. And national security is the number one thing, by the way. A lot of you guys, hedge fund or private equity people, would be economic policy. I know that. But really, fundamentally, it comes down to national security. And a non-combatant evacuation operation, to me, is the definition of an inherently governmental function. This should not be outsourced to civilians that don't have the training, the education, the experience. They outsourced. I don't know whether it was by design or whether just Americans stepped into the breach again, as they always do. The thing that's been most crazy for me is the outpouring. I mean, I get a little down on America sometimes too, because I watch too many of the shows. But man, this has been something special to watch people come together and be outcome focused. And so I'm just really, really disappointed that we let so many people down that have relied on us.
Yeah, and I think I'm not in a position to opine on what could have happened, and certainly given your experience, I'd love your perspective on how things could have been shaped. But I think at least for me, just reflecting on the last, I think we're on day 17 of probably the most intense environment I've been in since leaving Afghanistan, is just the amount of Americans that have stepped up. I mean, this sheer concept of if there's not something that is officially executed on behalf of, like you're suggesting, a government entity or a former allied nation, we're going to find a way or make one, right? This whole concept of their own accord, sua sponte, which is something, near and dear to the Rangers. There's really no power as mighty as free people, and this concept of being committed to a moral course of their own accord, nobody told them to do it. I mean, the friends I have, and I won't name them by name here, that decided that the best place that they could be was at a point of friction where they could make a difference and affect change, didn't ask. They didn't say, can I do this? They said, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to find a way there. And when they found resistance, they slid to the right or the left and found their way to the ground. So whether that's forward or in some intermediary friendly allied nation, or here, in a luxury hotel in DC, working 22-hour days for 16 days in a row to try to make a difference, it happened. And it is, at least for me, it's the most inspiring thing I've seen since the military, unequivocally. And it gives me this deep sense of hope that it is not lost. Like, there is a nation that remains the beacon of hope, that is absolutely unequivocally committed to doing the right thing, regardless of who, a talking head may be or may try to signify. So for me, that's the story, and it has only just begun.
Fran, that's why I think this podcast is important to do log form, because I have to do all the shows where they, say these hope, like, so when Biden gets done kicking his dog and, all this stuff, and you're like, that's not helpful. We need to have a more fulsome discussion. And I'm going to go there if I could. You're a poli-sci guy. De Tocqueville talked when was he in America? Like 1780 or whatever. He does his rounds of America, and he talked about the secret sauce. He didn't say that, but that's why I'm going to describe it. America is the social and civil society, the social clubs, the libraries, the churches, the weirdo, clubs. And he said, and then we went through that phase, remember, of bowling alone, and America's insulated and everybody's just looking at their phone and no one cares about their neighbor anymore. And that's kind of where we've been for a while. And this thing is the definition of de Tocqueville. This is a new type of social and civil society. This is my hope, at least. And no one left behind. And there's other great groups. You guys have formed what I really hope will become a platform to move forward. And it's going to be your generation. My generation, we screwed it up enough. No, my generation just has to bridge before you guys take over. I hope that something comes out of it. I hope that you guys continue with this and take this as a foundation to build something that I really think can transform America for the better. And I know I sound like some political shill. I know that. But I mean, that's my fervent hope, really, that out of this doggone tragedy of our end of the war in Afghanistan, we can build something that really lasts and changes America. And you guys are doing it. It's amazing I'm such a bit part in it. I'm like the appendix, man. Like, if I disappeared tomorrow, no one would know. You'd have a little scar and they're like, that guy, that was bad, but what happened? You guys have been doing all the lifting, and just watch you guys do the heavy lifting. It's been really the only positive thing I've seen out of this.
This episode is brought to you by Analytics. Whatever industry you're in, Analytics has a group of experts with experience bringing efficiency, transparency, and analysis to your business performance. This includes franchises, restaurants, hotels and hospitality, professional services, e-commerce, startups, and retail. People and collaboration are two of the most important factors in running a successful company. Whether it's private label service, collaboration, or direct engagement with your customers, Analytics can be involved in your client relationships, or they can complete all that other stuff and let you take the credit for it. Visit analytics.com for more information. That's ANALYTIX.com.
I think that there has to be an element of resiliency that comes from this kind of group of leaders who have to emerge. I think out of the next 12 to 24 months, I think if you were to put a time frame on it, that's what I would think. Because if you look back the last 24 months, we've gone through, as a nation, we've gone through COVID, we've gone through racial tension, we've gone through a very awful political cycle.
And I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. It's just a disaster from all fronts. And now we have this situation in Afghanistan, which has, in some ways polarizing, in some ways unifying, in the fact that, I don't think anybody's going to stand up and say that, what's going on there is okay. But there has to be some level of resiliency. And then to your point, Chris, there has to be humility. Another one of, we talk about the 9 characteristics of elite performance as defined by SOF on this podcast. And we have to look internally at the back end of this now, as you say, and understand where we got it wrong. That can't be, I agree with you, that can't be led by those in the seats now. It has to be led by the next generation of leaders who say, we understand where we are. This is why we got here, but we have to move forward. We've got to do it together. I have a question for the group, and I want to kind of go around and talk about it, but 2/3 of the Afghan population is under the age of 25 right now. And that means that most people in that country only know Americans there, only know the international community there. I believe there's an argument to be made about, we've termed it nation building. That's a polarizing term. People get very upset when you say that. If you look at World War II, the Korea War, we're still there. We stabilized those countries. We had a 50-year, 80-year view in Europe. We're still in Germany, Italy. And that presence created, I believe, a calm that allowed those nations to focus on their economy, on building internally. Look at Japan, the economic powerhouse in the world. They didn't have a military for decades by nature of the treaty. Did we leave too soon? What's your thoughts on the fact that we put 20 years in, but in terms of this conversation, 20 years is a blink of the eye. We've talked about it here. 20 years ago for all of us, we'll say, I feel like it was yesterday, standing in my apartment, watching the TV.
I personally, because of my connection and my years in Afghanistan were some of the most formative of my life, I had hoped that there would be a way where the international community and us, the U.S., would stay involved for multiple generations, just like you described with Korea and Germany and Japan, because I think that would have been the answer. But I also recognize that you come up against an issue of national will, like committing the money, committing the resources, committing to losing people, even if combat operations ends and it becomes more of economic development, and all those types of assistance. I believed I wanted to be in it for the long haul because I think that would have been the only way to help them effectively develop this way over the next couple generations.
Yeah, I would say something very similar. I think unfortunately many of us are now seeing, those of us that are not in the throes of supporting evacuation and, what will come in resettlement, we're seeing this almost inevitability of a return, right? It's hard for us, those of us that spent time there, particularly fighting, to fathom what happens in a vacuum. And Sonia knows better than we do what that experience unfortunately may be like, and whether or not it would be inevitable that we will have a place in the future history of that country. So yes, I would say from my perspective, and again, I'd acknowledge that it's limited and it's not senior enough to have all the information around what we could do, but just comparing, the paths of other nations that you referenced, it seems to me that with some kind of combined, we did a significant drawdown over the years. So if that was diversified with other friendly nations that have an interest in, the long-term future of a viable country, that we could have done it. And why we decided, it seems unfortunately that it's easy to point to politics around why we drew the line in the sand, why we picked a particular date and forced, a country and, its military to somehow meet those totally unrealistic deadlines based on information that we now know is likely compromised is horrific. So yeah, I think that it certainly would have been there would have been a viable way of long-term stability without having an engaged combat force long-term.
Sonia, what about from your perspective?
I think it would have been so great to still have some kind of commitments or stabilities into the ground. It's getting much more into politics that I don't have the knowledge of. But from my perspective, there were a lot of people, like in past 2 decades, people has gone through a lot of things. Like they have did a lot of sacrifice. People lost their family members and still they were hoping for a bright future. But what has happened is we're just at the same situation that we were there 20 years ago. So all those sacrifice, all those work, all those missions, everything end up being again into situation where we were.
Friend, leadership matters. And I think sometimes that sounds so cliche because we were all raised in an environment where that was the coin of the realm. And you almost got to the point where just stop it. If I hear it. But that's been the biggest experience for me leaving the service is we took it for granted, the power of good leadership. And I really think if we had solid leadership that could communicate what we were trying to do, I think the American people are really, really compassionate and understanding and resilient. And I think the American people are underestimated a lot of times by the leadership that somehow, they have feet of clay and they're weak. There's nothing further from the truth. And my final thing is I would sit through all those classes on strategy and jab my eyes out with the doggone pencil and it was like Charlie Brown. Wah, wah, wah. And now strategy matters, really matters. And that somehow we lost our moorings in the last 20 years. And that's the kind of where I really hope that people can come forward and figure some things out about how we can do this better in the future, because that linkage of strategy and leadership, I got to tell you, I respectfully disagree with people that say that we don't have the will or the, ability to do things long-term anymore.
There's a lot of conversation right now where people are saying that it wasn't worth it because they say we're back where we started. There were a lot of good people who were lost on all sides of this thing over the last 20 years. How do we reconcile that? And how do we tell people that it was worth it? And was it?
I go to scripture, no greater love. That's what I have to go with right now. I can't talk about it, really.
Yeah, for me, it's easy. I think I would just reference the beautiful story Sonia told. And I think we've been fortunate to have some interactions with folks that, because of the efforts of many volunteers over the last 16 days, are now on a path to the United States, which is, something we can be incredibly proud of, and that will change for generations. The generations of deserving future American citizens that have done their part over the last 20 years to support us when we needed it for a number of grave international issues are now going to be, the next bedrock of the United States. And I think that's something that we can be really proud of. So for me, there's no question about, was it worth it? I think you need not look any further than our SIV ambassadors and their families, and certainly the thousands and thousands that are going to be soon United States citizens, and help redefine why this is so important to remain committed to.
I absolutely believe it was worth it. It's never a question of should you fight tragedy and should you fight evil, you must. And I'll go back to what Chris said at the beginning, our role as leaders is to keep hope alive. And I am still, despite all of this in the crisis that's happening, I do have hope. More people will continue to be saved. There's more on the way here that are going to be a new generation of leaders. I'm not giving up hope. So I feel that it was worth it.
And where were you 9/11?
So on 9/11, I was already in the Army. I had graduated from Vanderbilt in 2000, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the MP Corps. And I went to Korea.
It's the best rank in the Army.
Totally.
No.
I'd like to go back to it.
Yeah, same. You have some level of responsibility, but nobody expects you to know anything.
I was 21. And because it was the end of the 90s, the very beginning of the 2000s, the most exciting place you could go as an MP lieutenant was Korea or Kosovo. And I wanted to be a platoon leader. I wanted to be where it made a difference. Korea was a way to do that. So we were prepared. We had convoyed up for an exercise at the DMZ, and our platoon was waiting. We were sleeping in one of those Quonset hut hangars that they have up there at the DMZ. And this exercise was going to kick off something early in the early hours of the morning. And, military policemen do battlefield circulation and control. We were going to do checkpoints and our enemy prisoner of war exercises.
Well, you were going to hassle all of us that were driving fast.
Yeah, you weren't wearing your seatbelt, Chris, or your reflective belt.
I do still owe a ticket to Yongsan for not having my seatbelt on.
You're going on my list. I'm going to call it in.
Don't confuse your rank with my authority.
So, it was the middle of the night there. And all of our little Roshan phones started ringing pretty much simultaneously. And, we're kind of, people are answering, talking to their families, and I actually thought for a minute that it was the exercise kicking off, how they'll give you like a terrorist attack has occurred, like, oh, this is the scenario we're being given. And it took probably 5 or 10 minutes of us talking to different family members, people that had family in New York, couldn't get a hold of siblings or parents, to realize like, this is real. So of course we were recalled to our base. It was like a 9-hour convoy at the time because it was the army of the 90s. We didn't even have ammunition. Like you traveled like with your rounds and your blank adapters and everything. We had a couple magazines of ammunition that we divided up between the trucks, because if you remember all the rumors that were happening in the 24 and 48 hours after the attacks, like more attacks were coming, more planes were missing. They said there was a plane missing out of like Incheon Air Base. All that was resolved, but we didn't know how global this attack was going to be. So we convoyed home down the peninsula, and it was really, I think, about 12 or 15 hours before I saw the images of what had occurred, because we were being told, but you can't grasp it. You just, they're just like, come home, like, come back to the base. We're standing up, enhanced force protection measures. And I remember walking into our company day room and seeing it on TV, and like just the horror of the scale of it, like that is when it hit me. And so we went to enhanced force protection. MP stand on gates. We stood on gates for the next 6 months. And I thought, Chris and his folks are all going off to Afghanistan. And I thought, man, I'm going to miss the war. Here I am stuck guarding a gate. And then when I would look back 20 years later, as I got ready to retire, when I was sitting in Bagram, which was my 6th deployment overall, my 3rd tour in Afghanistan, I did not miss the war. And these past couple weeks, has felt like the last good fight for me.
I think we got more fights in us.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a new beginning. I mean, I was watching the president the other day, and he said, the war on terror is over. And I think I looked at my wife and I said, but the new war has just begun. Chris, you had some statements about the Taliban, and you said that negotiating with the Taliban was not a mistake. And you said, quote, that's how these wars end. You have to negotiate with your opponent. There was no ability to defeat the Taliban on the battlefield. There was the ability. We just decided not to do what was necessary to do that, which I, as an American, agreed with.
Well, my humor does not come out on these shows at all. By the way, it's not humor. My kids are like, Dad, you're not funny. But what I was trying to say there was, our armed forces, we can do anything. And that's not a criticism of the political leadership, but I felt that we can basically run across the ground and sow it and remove any living thing and sow the ground with salt so nothing grows there for 10,000 years. But that's not our culture as Americans. And that's what I was trying to get to. But this narrative, like, you can never win. No, you can always win militarily. But we as a people and a nation, that's not what we do. That's what I was trying to say. I know that's really that's totally dorky, and everybody's like rolling their eyes, like, move on.
No, but I think that's the frustrating part, because the frustrating part of this thing is that you watch the images, as what you've dealt with, J.D. Mariah, the last couple of weeks, and what Sonia's experienced with her family, is that you see these images and you see these reports at the airport at HKIA, and it says, well, the Taliban is in control of the terminal.
Well, I'll go there. I mean, you guys have to be careful because you're representing, and rightfully so, what 1375 was sitting on the airstrip ready to go. And we had 1,500 Americans and then the 82nd was more than willing to jump in any place. I did not think for a moment, I don't know how that happened in your Monday morning quarterbacking, but if these reports coming out about these agreements with the Taliban, the biggest thing I learned from this one in terms of strategy and policy is strength does matter. And I don't think we needed to accept that. How many of your buddies have you talked to and you're wargaming it? I had a great one the other day. Well, there are 3 brigades in the 82nd. You could have dropped one in Kandahar. One. And I'm like, yeah, we could have done that. That's right. Back to your point, right? I mean, what are you guys hearing? I mean, haven't we all kind of gone through the planning process and going, well, hey, wait a second. If you were a company commander and some of that stuff happened, you would have gotten fired, Mariah. And then we see senior leadership, like I don't even see him on TV anymore. I get these vacuous statements, but I'm really into accountability right now. There has to be some accountability because this was mismanaged. And that's all right. When you're on the ground and you're in negotiations with the Taliban, whether you're in Doha or you're outside the Abbey Gate, I got it. But you know what? That says something about the way we train, educate, and experience, and the experiential development of our leadership. I mean, remember Schwarzkopf you guys don't remember this, in 91 ended up having to cut a deal with Saddam Hussein. He's like, I'm a military guy. He goes, you're the only one. Go cut a deal. Didn't we learn a lesson there? Shouldn't our senior military leaders have more sophistication when it comes down to negotiations and how wars end? I got a lot of heartache on that one, and I'll just be quiet now because I'm ruining your podcast. But this is really something that we've got. That's going to be my passion.
No, I mean, this is critically important because we talk about leadership. You've brought it up here a few times. And having the courage to make hard decisions, having the courage to have the difficult conversations that you don't want to have with people that you don't want to have conversations with is an important part of leadership. And that doesn't matter if you're a military leader, a political leader, you run a company, you're a manager in a company. Can you stand up in the difficult times when everybody else wants to walk away and not say anything and speak and have a position and defend your position and take action?
And be willing to walk if you are so passionate and committed to your belief that you're willing, that's the definition of selfless service, isn't it? That you're willing to like, okay, I guess I'm going to be out of a job, but it's all right because and I'm not saying that's not, people deal with it every day. This isn't something you do every day. Like, if I don't get my way, boss, I'm going to walk. But, there's certain times in a life where you're counted, and you guys are nodding your heads. I mean, we all know that. And it's so rare. There are only a couple times in your career where you're counted, right? I mean, you guys, I can tell you right where they were. I felt like this was one that mattered, where people should have, they take your full measure at that point. All the other stuff like, oh, gee, your TPS reports aren't in on time. Like, who cares about that? But there's certain times in a career, in a professional life, in a personal life too, where, man, you're counted. It matters. And this mattered. And I'm really, really, really want to hope that we are going to look at this closely. That was my political way of saying, what the heck?
So next, relocation, resettlement, humanitarian aid. No one left behind is a critical component of carrying those three pillars forward. So what's the focus now for no one left behind on these three?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit from my perspective, and then I'd love to turn it over to Mariah, who's one of the new originals for how we are possibly in the position we are today with an organization that is going to be so important for the next decade. So I've been fortunate. I've known Mariah for about 10 years, but was reconnected when she reached out about the growth and reestablishment of the board of No One Left Behind. And when she first approached me, it certainly is something that I could relate to given my combat deployments experience, reliance on our allies that are still there, hoping and wishing that they could come here. But frankly speaking, I didn't have the same emotional tie to what was occurring until there became a point of friction where we couldn't get them and they were under very serious duress and risk. And so the board, Mariah included, they were doing incredible work for months and months and months, all as a volunteer organization, to try to bridge a gap that existed right now with a State Department special immigration visa program that took an average of 3.5 years. And if you think about, Sonia can weigh in on this, the imminent risk that exists on a day-to-day basis, much less a month-to-month or year-to-year, thinking about families waiting 3.5 years average, with some extending as far as 8 years, to get something that, frankly, we committed to, we promised to provide based on years of service they provided to us. For me, that rises above reasonable expectations. Is this worth my time? Is this somewhere I want to dedicate personal and professional resources? This becomes, like we say, a moral obligation. But they were in, Mariah included, were in the issues. They understood the nuances of government policy and the challenges at various government agencies, et cetera. For me, it really wasn't until the fall. So I was aware of the issues and we were working on a number of advocacy initiatives, but it really wasn't until we knew, the nation had fallen. And this went from being, something we needed to dedicate resources to and increase advocacy around to being a life or death issue minute by minute. And so at that point in time, at least for me personally, and I think there's a number of other members, both of the board and the staff, the volunteers, the community, et cetera, that realized now it's not a question of, can I dedicate this amount of time on a volunteer basis? It was, if I don't do this, who will perish because of it? And when you ask service members, former service members, people that would have gladly, stepped in front of others to save their life, I mean, it's not even a question. It's a moral imperative. And at least for me, that's when I got even more engaged on the operational side, because I just don't know the things that Mariah or James or Chris or Keith or others have worked on these issues for, some of them, years. I don't have that level of depth in the policy and in the advocacy, but I know operations, and I know the guys that I've served with in the past that have the ability to impact and affect change right now. So for me, that was why it was something that I knew I needed to do, and my fiance was supportive of, and family and my business partners stepped out of the way and said, do what you need to do to get this done. So that was my contribution. I would love for Mariah to talk a little bit more about No One Left Behind, the reason that this is so important to so many. And in the transition, I would just state, and when I was asked recently by some folks in the government who are trying to affect change in a positive way, and I won't name them by name at this point, but this in particular was a senator who deeply cares. And he said, tell us why this issue that is directly at the mission set of No One Left Behind is so important for your generation. And, I immediately went to veterans, and I look at what is the epidemic across veterans today. And, there's all sorts of challenges around emotional support and mental illness, or, frankly, look at the suicide rate alone in the veteran community. When you take people that are purpose-driven, selfless, folks that wouldn't characterize themselves as humanitarians necessarily, but I certainly would align them very closely with humanitarians of a service aptitude. When you empower them, allow them to go change the world and make commitments and promises to people that kept them alive for years, some of them deployments, 15, 16 deployments. And then when they come home and they transition out, you tell them that all those commitments they made, the people they got to know who saved their life on countless occasions, we're not going to abide by those commitments. We're not going to honor those promises. And it's not because we can't. You look then and you see why this is becoming a challenge. The uproar, it has not even begun in the veteran community. I think we are in for a serious awakening if we think for a second that people are going to stay quiet about this issue. So I could talk about this for a long time, but I can certainly imagine that those of us in this room are hearing this in a very profound way. I can assure you it's just beginning. So, Mariah, if you wouldn't mind, just a little bit more on No One Left Behind.
Sure. I'll talk about the mission of No One Left Behind and what it has been for years. And then I would love to hear about Sonia's perspective as one of our ambassadors. But JD touched on an important point. We're all volunteers. This is a volunteer board. This is technically my first day of my new job as Director of Government Affairs for Accrete AI Government. I have
You skipped the first day?
I skipped the first day. No, it's a great story. My new boss, is former Special Operations Community, and he's been checking on me these past couple weeks. A couple days ago, he was like, just take the week or two you need to keep working on this and then take a few days for yourself. And I'm like, I can't start a new job by taking 2 weeks off. And he's like, yeah, you can. I'm telling you, you can. You have to do this. I get it. And he's helped me make connections. He knows Chris. He's just been, I made the right choice to join this company.
You want to know what? He's a heck of a great leader, isn't he?
He really is.
Sorry, I know you. This is a leadership podcast.
We're going to go shout out to Bill Wall, who's a great leader.
Bill is just the best. You just summed up the characteristics there. That's so neat to hear. So proud.
So in my volunteer role as a board member of No One Left Behind, the organization for years, since 2014, when it was founded by Janish Shinwari, who himself came over as an SIV and took the money that his former Army mates raised for him through a GoFundMe, not to furnish his house and do other things, but to start this organization. For years, our main mission has been to advocate for who these translators are, what the process is like. The process is just fraught with bureaucracy, and it's tragic that it takes so long to get their visas, because more would be here if we hadn't created such a bureaucratic red tape process. It can fail at multiple points just for administrative reasons, not the fault of the applicant themselves. So we were positioned, we can advise on the process. We were in touch with, this large community of SIVs, of translators. And then our main mission before this has always been to help them once they're here. There is an established government-funded resettlement process for immigrants to the U.S., and we plug into that to understand who's here, what basic benefits they're receiving, and then how can we, in the past, we always helped them out with direct financial support. once the resettlement benefits ends or wherever the gaps are in the resettlement process, things from, major medical bills for children when they arrive because they didn't grow up with, the right type of care, car grants, car loans, those types of things to help them be successful. That is what we are doing now. We did it for like a few hundred every year while our presence was still we still had a presence in Afghanistan, and these folks were coming over kind of on a regular basis. It wasn't a crisis. And now we have grown over 2 weeks tenfold. We need to grow 50-fold. We need to get ready to continue to help this resettlement process in the U.S.
Sonia, you're an ambassador of the No One Left Behind program. And now, as we've moved 122,000 Afghans out of Afghanistan just by airlift alone, they've got to go somewhere. Right now, there's a lot here in the U.S. There's a lot in other countries that are awaiting, processing and then, onward movement to the U.S. or other countries. One of the roles that you have is to welcome these people into the U.S. And so can you talk about what's on the horizon for you as we now begin and prepare to receive tens of thousands of Afghan immigrants into the U.S.?
Sure. So allow me first talk about my engagement with No One Left Behind. So I enjoy helping people, especially women and children. So as soon as I arrived into the United States, I offered my help to World Relief, and I was helping them volunteer in all sorts of interpretation, family issues, teaching women, and all other sort of family issues. And then recently, I knew No One Left Behind is one of the nonprofit organizations that wants to make sure every eligible individual should get her right. I was very much inspired for the work they have been doing and wanted to have the honor of working with them. My role is to work as their ambassador for the U.S., for the SIV holders in California. So our current process is whenever our mission is to help first the SIV holders, but if we get more support, we might be able to help others, but it's not a commitment that I can make, but it's only for SIV holders. So as soon as they arrive to the state, specifically, if they arrive to California, we have resettlement agencies that they welcome them. And then after they are complete all their process, and if anyone is in need of help, they're referring to us and we are financially supporting them. We're reviewing case by case. At least for California, I think I have more than 200 applications at the moment that they need help, they want support. So I'm sure with the current situation that we are receiving so many other new arrivals, we'll be having more. So here is the good time. We have a great team of leadership. We have great veterans and SIV ambassadors that they're working round the clock. They want to help people. And here is the time that we request the U.S. people to stand by us, to help No One Left Behind, to be able to help the new arrivals.
Hey, Fran, Chris, I'm not part of No One Left Behind. So this is not a paid public announcement or anything like that, but I've had the pleasure and honor of working with a lot of organizations in the last 17 days. And I met James because he's a neighbor of my former battalion commander. I could go on all day long about that. That's not neither here nor there, but there are so I've met a lot of the organizations and the groups, and I'm telling you, No One Left Behind is the one. There's actually a lot going on out there. There's some fly-by-night places, let's just be honest, that just want to exploit this current situation. And I'm telling you, No One Left Behind was here at the beginning, and they're going to be here for a long, long time. It's a voluntary organization, and their books are open and all that. And once again, I'm not part of them. I'm not even going to get a T-shirt out of it because there'll be a public conflict of interest. But so Sonia, her points are just, she nailed it. This is the one that's going to be here for the long haul, and they need to grow. I think that's going to create challenges for you guys, but you're way smarter than I do. You'll figure that out. Got a lot of work to do.
So at the end of every one of the Jedburgh podcast episodes, and I know you've all listened to all the episodes up to this point, so I appreciate that. I asked my guests about the 3 things that they do every day to be successful. And Chris, you have on your Jedburgh shirt, which I love, because I caveat it in a sense of the Jedburghs in World War II, when they parachuted in behind enemy lines, they had to do 3 things every day as the foundational core skills to be successful. They had to shoot, move, and communicate. If they were proficient in those 3 skills, they could focus on other challenges because their challenges were numerous. So I ask everybody, what are the 3 things that you do every day to be successful? And so I do want to ask that to this group, because what each person in this room is charged with, not only up to this point in their careers, but from this point forward. And we've talked about action as leaders today here. We've talked about courage. We've talked about defining moments. 9/11, 20 years ago, a defining moment. Today, this is a defining moment, as Chris referenced. What are those 3 things each one of you do every day to be successful? We'll start with Mariah.
I'd say the 3 things that I do is, 1, I listen. I mean, I'm still being contacted by hundreds of people every day that need help. My LinkedIn, my email, like they're reaching out from everywhere, Americans and Afghans themselves. So I listen to what they need and what they're telling me and what their experiences are. And then I connect. This problem is bigger than all of us. And there are some amazing outpourings of assistance and advice and financial resources. And so all I can do is like make connections and send out things to connect people as fast as possible and hope that it kind of, the effort just continues to spread and ripple outward. And then the last thing I do is I speak, which is what we're doing today, which is what we've done, No One Left Behind has done for years to advocate for the process and for what it takes to help our Afghan allies.
JD?
Yeah, I was thinking about, there was one thing, and I think distilling it into 3. So 1 would be just serve in a connection capacity. So I've done this, in my early days. We were talking about Ranger School on the ride over, and I joked about it because I think everyone, I could have looked to my left and right, and most people were probably more skilled in every task. But if I made them look better in some capacity, they took care of me, and clearly that served me throughout my life. So I feel like my number 1 priority in all of this, and it's one of the reasons I got so involved, is I've been fortunate to be connected with folks that are much more capable than I at various tasks. So making sure that I identify what those are and plug them in to the systems where they can have the greatest impact. So that's just be a connector. The 2 would be lead with why, make sure that those people we're connecting, that we're putting in positions for them to take on an outsized role. They understand why we're doing it. So it's not just a, task condition standards thing. It's deeply understand why we're in this, what it means to me so that they can understand perhaps what it means to them. So leading with why. And the 3rd one was just move to points of friction and be bold. So there's plenty of times and there's plenty of people that right now are pointing fingers, looking over their shoulder, wondering what this may incur in terms of liability in the future. And that's not the way free people live. So move to points of friction and be bold because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Sonia?
So I'll be concise. I'll just say, stay positive and be helpful. Look forward and spread out the word about the non-profit organizations like No One Left Behind, and please help them achieve their mission. And also look forward and save lives. Please, this really matters for the people who left behind and for our mission too.
Thank you.
Do you have to go? Do you have to do this each time, or have you already shared that on your website?
My 3?
Yeah.
No,
Hey, so I think you need to. Could you imagine if you were filming this? How funny it would be, because for you, all of those of you out there in podcast land, Fran throws that down, and we are frantically like, everybody's like, I need a piece of paper.
Quick, be eloquent.
Yeah, I know. I literally had that moment, like, come up to the chalkboard and do this math. I literally had public math fear just set in. First off, hey man, if you think you're a good leader, you're not, because every day is a new day. And if anybody that says like, oh, I'm a great leader, they're not, because they're not self-aware enough to know that this business is just the toughest thing you'll ever do. And every day you go home and go, I wish I would have done it better. But here are my 3. I did listen too, but listen/learn, be empathetic, don't ever quit.
Amen.
I love it. Well, I can't thank everybody here enough for taking the time out of your busy schedules to sit with me today. This is a truly impactful conversation. The situation that we're in, it's real. It's real and it's dire. We talked about Mariah, you talked about 9/11 and, having to see it 12, 15 hours later and being like, wow, that actually happened. I mean, this situation's happening. You're seeing it on your phones. You're seeing the pictures. We're seeing it in the news in real time. Sonia's living it through her family. Now's the time to take action. I was preparing this end this morning, and I received a note on LinkedIn. It was odd. It was very timely. And I'm pulling it up here because I think it's important to understand how real this is. And I received a note from an Afghan who worked with American forces who's currently stuck in Afghanistan. And it's fairly lengthy, so I won't read the whole thing, but he explains who he worked for, and he talks about his family, and he explains that, I'll read a little bit of it. And he says, the situations are very strange for me and my family, so I've shifted my house and my family from one city to another that I won't name, so that the enemy may not recognize me, but they are still seeking to find me. I have the complete documents for my SIV case, but the period to get my SIV is very lengthy. So that's why I've decided to send you this email for immediate evacuation from Afghanistan. That was this morning, 8:26. And so this is happening. Now is the time to take action. Our nation, Afghanistan, collectively, us as nations, I think we've given everything to the war on terror. As we talked about, we fought the war on terror for 20 years, and we may have declared that it's over, but the new war has probably begun. And the sooner we accept that, the faster we can tailor our actions and the next step as leaders. On August 26th, 13 U.S. service members and nearly 100 Afghans were killed in a car bomb at the Kabul airport. These will officially be the last to make the ultimate sacrifice on the war on terror. They will not be the last to make the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our nation. And regardless of what the next chapter holds, we must forever remember those who protect our freedom. So I thank you for joining me today. Visit nooneleft.org to be involved. Deo Preso Liber.
American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm your host, Fran Rachopi. We're brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search firm and talent advisory. We'll drive you to attract, retain, and develop top talent. With services like talent acquisition, leadership development, and keynote speeches, we work with you to create talent solutions to business problems. To get started, visit talentwargroup.com. Join us next week for a new episode of the Jedburgh Podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Rachopi, the Talent War Group, and the Jedburgh Podcast on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Podcast and the Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.